Chapter 4. So, as I've previously mentioned, we covered the first 2 years, kind of their biology in Chapter 3, and now we'll cover their social experience during these same first 2 years. So, of course, culture and experience are going to influence the norms of development. This is especially true for emotional development after the first 8 months. But if you think about a baby, you'll recognize that you've seen some of these things. Um, a couple of things to note, for us, particularly for moms who have had postpartum depression. A lot of them end up connecting with their baby at around 4 months when they get those full responsive smiles. They start to kind of bond and form that attachment with the baby. So that's helpful for a lot of moms um, that are going through that. Not necessarily all of them, though. Remember that different experiences are going to look different, of course. And then I believe we mentioned the Rouge test, which is going to be how they're testing self awareness at 18 months. So once the baby touches their nose with the lipstick, instead of touching the mirror, because they think they're looking at a different child, then they start to realize that they have that self awareness. They also start to feel pride, shame, guilt, embarrassment, things like that, um, which you see when they try and help them do something and things don't really always work out in their favor. As I mentioned in the last chapter, really the things we're seeing with babies is their need to survive. So when they show their emotions, so pleasure or pain, that's really all they know. They don't have experience to draw on for sadness or happiness or other little nuanced emotions that we get through experience. Crying, however, is pretty universal. They typically cry, obviously, here you can see when they're hurt, of course, when they're hungry, tired, frightened. Some babies end up having colic, which is an uncontrollable reflux. They say that, well, from what I understand, babies mostly just naturally grow out of that as they get older. Some babies do excessively cry, and it's not easy to figure out why they're crying, because it's almost I think they say excessive is like 75% of the time or more. But again, babies are looking to have their basic needs met, so possibly excessive crying is due to maybe they feel their body feels like they're not getting enough nutrition or enough attention or whatever. It's certainly hard to be conclusive because, as we've talked about, babies can't just tell you what's wrong with them. So, see, here are some of those emotions as they come up. So, they do start to smile at other people around 6 weeks old. Laughter. They find really mundane things pretty funny. They can knock something off a table, or someone can make a funny face and they find it really funny. And so they do start to laugh back with you, which is really kind of the beginning of those social bonds that they're making with other humans. So they do start to get frustrated and angry around 6 months. If you remember, the body can't move itself that early, so they're probably sitting up, but they can't. They're not mobile. They can't really get to where they want to go at this age. So if something's not right there available to them, they can't do anything about it, and they get that frustration. So it's again a natural expression. Sadness, of course, a lot of babies end up feeling sad when they're separated from their parents. An increased production of cortisol we'll talk about with stress throughout the different chapters. But long-term increased production of cortisol is really bad for your immune system and your immune functioning. Typically, that's also connected to that your parasympathetic nervous system and that fight or flight response. So you see babies who have that long term often have more negative outcomes than their peers. You can see here this baby is quite terrified of Santa, and we've probably all seen a million pictures of babies terrified of Santa. These are, it's a normal reaction for her age. Babies do have that fear. It's almost that stranger danger, even though they've not quite been taught stranger danger yet, but they realize this person doesn't meet my needs, I've never seen them before. What benefit are they to me? And they can't understand that he's like a novelty or whatever. So they do get weary of someone that's unfamiliar to them. Emotions, for emotions to develop, it does require that we have an awareness of other people. That what emotions develop are also going to be influenced by both of our family interactions and our culture. Temper tantrums do appear at this time. Often we'll see babies having a full-blown screaming meltdown in public. They're also doing it at home, of course. Sometimes kids just kind of shut down and go into like a fetal position and they're completely silent. Also, a temper tantrum. They don't understand their feelings, so they're trying to figure out how to deal with it. So sometimes that looks like, just a full-on out loud meltdown, so that they're alerting other people, hey, something's wrong. I don't feel like I should, but they can't tell you if they're mad or sad or happy or angry or what exactly it is that's got them so worked up. So self-awareness, we've talked about. It's a person's realization that they are their own individual, and their mind and actions are separate from those of other people. But self-awareness in that respect doesn't quite develop until more into middle childhood, early childhood, middle childhood-ish. When they start to develop theory of mind, which we'll talk about, I think, when we get to probably middle childhood. So I think self-awareness at this stage, 0 to 2, is really just that they have their own body, that they're an individual in their body. And that's how the way they measure that, we've already discussed, is through the Rouge test. And I think we'll look at that more on the next slide. So here's the Rouge test. So this is how they discover self-awareness. And we have discussed this already, but basically they'll put some rouge on the nose of the baby and then put them in front of a mirror. And does the baby touch the mirror, or does the baby touch themselves? If they touch themselves, they've developed that self-awareness. They know that they're looking at themselves in the mirror, basically. Temperament is often confused with personality. It is different than personality because it's genetic. It's not something that you learn, which is personality, which would be personality. We learn personality. It's basically, are we slow to warm up, or are we very friendly with other people? That's going to be what we're looking at specifically, and I think even more specifically, we'll look at it on the next slide. So 3 dimensions of temperament. We have effortful control, which is regulating attention and emotion and the ability to self-soothe. This actually develops across the lifespan. We're always working on um, regulating our attention and our emotions. Some of us have more trouble with that than others, and that does shift in some ways as you get older. We learn ways to self-soothe and to cope and to do other things. So it can shift a little bit, but mostly it's kind of an inborn um, temperament is more or less inborn, but it can change slightly. Um, Negative mood, fearful, angry, or unhappy. So you can either be fearful or not fearful, angry or pretty laid back, sort of situation. And exuberant is going to be exuberant. Um, is different than being like an extrovert. If you think of, I sometimes people will think of shy and like introverts, but those are two separate things, and we'll talk more about introversion and extroversion when we get to probably adolescence or adulthood. We'll talk about those things in more detail.